welcome to Cooking with Etta. Today we have a special treat. We are on location at our favorite Italian restaurant, Chez Paul. Welcome, Paul.
Hi, Etta.
Good to see you.
Thank you.
What are you going to be making for us today?
We are going to be making spaghetti gravy with meatballs.
At his grandma's house, we used to eat this dish they're about to prepare. It's simple. It's spaghetti and meatballs, but it's the Italian version of it, and it's excellent. So.
It's a lot of pressure.
Well, tell me about this spaghetti and meatball dish.
Spaghetti and meatballs, every Italian family pretty much has their recipe for how they do it. This one came from my grandmother, as Tony indicated, also known as my nonni, which is an Italian grandmother. So these are the basics of how we make it, the spices we use to make it, but different families, different regions of Italy might use completely different spices, different cuts of meat. Today we're going to be using beef neck bones to get it started, and we're going to add meatballs to it. Oftentimes I will use pork neck bones. We didn't have any this time. Sometimes I will use pork and beef. You can use Italian sausage, you could use chicken, you could use vegetables, you could use meat, mushrooms. There's a variety of things you can do to get the base for your spaghetti gravy.
Well, that sounds like you can just make it any way you like to. So I remember the first time I got to try spaghetti sauce, or spaghetti gravy.
That's our other little thing is, different Italians call it sauce. Some call it sauce, some call it gravy. As I like to say, the only problem with the ones that call it sauce are they're wrong.
Well, I'll try and remember that it's spaghetti gravy, but I know the first time that I had it, I was at your nonny's, and it was Christmas Eve. It was special dinner, so you'll be in for a real treat if you get to make this deal.
So Etta, can you hand me the neck bones?
Okay.
Okay, so we're going to take our neck bones. Again, we've got some hot oil on the bottom, and we're going to set them into the bottom of the pan.
Oh, listen to that. That's the oil.
Hear a nice little sizzle, that's what you want to hear. Okay, so now I would say we have a pretty good, if you get something like that, just so it's brown, you can see obviously the other side where it's still red. Those are the sides we'll continue to cook while we put the onions. You want to look in the pan after that to make sure that you have some fat in the bottom. You're going to have some fat from the meat now at this point, as well as the oil. I want to make sure the bottom's covered.
Okay. You just add a little bit more olive oil.
So a little bit more olive oil. And then we're going to take our onions here, which these have been pre-chopped, and this is basically one medium to large onion.
Oh, great.
Chopped. So the next step, we're going to put these onions in.
Okay. And how long do you cook those onions?
I would say the onions are going to need to be cooked anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes, somewhere in that area. You just want them to get soft, basically, is what you're looking for.
Is there a color that they change? Maybe they get translucent a little bit? Or
A little bit translucent, I would say. You don't want them to get brown. What we now want to add before the onions are completely done is some garlic. And this is about 2 tablespoons of garlic, which is about 4 cloves approximately. You don't want to put the garlic in too early because garlic will burn much easier than onions. So you want to get it toward the end. Just mix it with the onions. We'll get that in there. And we're going to want to mix it around with the onions.
So you're going to mix in your garlic and your onions.
And Ed, I'm sure at this point you kind of smell the onions, you can get some scent of what's
garlic.
going on.
Oh, yes.
And once you start getting a good scent of the garlic, you know you're in business on that part of it. So we're already starting to get some. You don't need a lot of time for the garlic to get going. So now we're
going to cook it till it's soft?
And it's basically, and it's relatively soft even in a minute, 2 minutes, you're probably good to go.
Okay.
Because we still have a fairly hot pan. Okay, so the next step
I just wanted to point out that this has been cooking continuously under medium-high heat. So you brown your meat, you cook your onions, and now you add the garlic. So you're definitely on medium-high heat. So you still got a really hot pot there.
Correct. So the next step we're going to do is to add our spices. So what we have here is about 1.5 tablespoons of parsley and 1.5 tablespoons of marjoram. Marjoram's kind of similar to oregano, but definitely has a different flavor to it. Again, some people might use sage, some people might use thyme, some people might use oregano, basil, whatever you might want to use that you like, go for it. I would definitely recommend using at least 2 different spices though. Some people might use 4 or 5 different spices in here. So.
And these are dry spices, so you can use fresh too, I imagine?
You can use fresh. I tend to think the longer I cook it, the dry tends to work a little better, but you absolutely can use fresh. Typically speaking, you're going to use a little less fresh than you're going to use dry.
Okay.
So, what you also want to do, because this is dry, to try to get some of the oils out of it is, so what I like to do is just take it and, you know, try to break it up, grind it up a little bit as you're putting it in.
Sprinkle it in, yes.
You want to break it up,
And you
not just
wanna-
throw it in there.
Right. So I usually just pinch it a little bit so that I
You
could,
can do that too. Now we're going to put the marjoram in.
I can smell it wafting over there. That's
It's a
making
good
my
sign,
tummy
Etta.
hungry, yes.
It's a good sign. Okay. So we're going to let this cook for about a minute. Another minute here. Try to get, again, as good of a mix as you can.
So your main goal is just to get it mixed into the flavor, but it doesn't have to be on every inch of the meat because these flavors are gonna meld over
Exactly.
a long period of time.
You want to get that aroma from it. That's the key. Okay, so we're pretty good there. So now the next step is, of course, the key to your spaghetti gravy, and that would be the tomatoes.
Okay.
So what we have here are 2 cans, I think they're 29-ounce cans of tomato puree. Again, there's 1 and 2. The other thing you're going to want to do is to add some hot water to it. Put that in here. Still have a little bit of tomato. I'm going to get another half can or so here. And I'm going to just put a touch more in here for now. And then I'm going to leave this here. So the thing you always have to remember with many of these things, in particular salt and water, you can put it in, you can't take it out.
Okay.
So always smarter to use a little less and add it than to go crazy with it. So
Makes sense.
now we've got our tomato and a little bit of water in there. And again, we're going to want to stir this around.
Now is the fire still, is this still a very hot pot? Are we still on the medium high?
Still
heat?
medium to medium high heat. Again, you want to get it as hot as you can without burning anything. Okay, we've been letting our beginnings of our gravy heat up. We've put in the tomato puree and some water, and now we're starting to see bubbles come up to the top. It's a little foamy. That's when you know it's about at that boil that you want it to be at. So the next step is going to be some salt, and this is about a half a tablespoon of salt. We're gonna put that in there.
Start off small when you're adding salt.
Then we're going to add a half a teaspoon of pepper to start with, and again, this is to your liking. A lot of people will put red pepper in it. If you like your gravy spicy, add some red pepper to it. Throw a pinch in, let it cook for a half hour, taste it. You want to add a little more heat to it, throw another pinch in, let it cook for a half hour, 20 minutes, taste it again. Then you're gonna start telling where your heat level is and where you want it to be. Okay, so we've got our rest
So this
of our,
is not going to be a spicy gravy. This will be a nice
This
flavor.
one won't. I do make it that way on occasion, however. It all depends on your audience. So the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to have her to open up this onion. We're essentially going to put an entire onion into the gravy, a peeled onion, and just put it into the gravy. Additionally, we're going to put a couple of carrots in, and I'm going to have Etta chop those in half. You don't need to make them in any specific fashion. You just want to make sure you peel those carrots. You can cut it into 10 pieces. You could leave them whole if you want. The goal there is to add a little sweetness to it and to get rid of acid from the gravy. So I'm going to have Etta do that onion, and then I'm going to also the next thing we're going to add is 2 small cans of tomato paste.
So do you want me to cut this in half or just leave it
No,
whole?
you can leave it whole,
Okay.
and in fact, let me just look. Yeah, looks perfect. So we're going to drop that right into the gravy. We are going to drop, you know what, cut the ends off of that, please. Now we're going to drop these into the gravy. And if you would then cut the bottoms off. Here's a nice little trick that actually Tony and Etta taught me, which I never knew. We used to scoop these out of the cans repeatedly when I was younger. But if you cut both ends off of these cans, it will pretty much just slip right into the gravy. And basically what you want to do, if you happen to make a larger batch, each of those large 29-ounce cans of tomatoes that you use, for every one of those you want to use 1 can of tomato, one of the small cans of tomato paste. So we've got one can in. We'll put the second can in. And again, you can just kind of see it as it's coming out. In a nice, and don't splash yourself.
See, I stepped far, far away.
So we have our 2 cans of tomato paste in there. We have our carrots. We put our onion in. The next step is going to be some wine. And I recommend basically a bottle about this size. You know, if you have an open bottle of wine, great. Generally, I'm going to want to use a red for tomato. So this one happens to be one that's a little sweet.
If you add a sweet, you might just add a pinch of sugar, or you might not have to add a pinch of sugar. It depends on how sweet your wine is.
Right. I will add that, and if you like it sweeter, add a little more sugar again. Now we've pretty much got everything in here. So I'm going to stir it up, and you're going to want to try to break up that tomato paste because it's going to be thick in there. But again, you don't have to be perfect because this is going to cook for a while. It will all come out and wash, believe me.
It's got a nice consistency right now.
Yeah, now we do. It's, you know, when we were at the stage before we put this last batch of stuff in there, we had a pretty watery kind of gravy. So now once you get the tomato paste, that'll thicken it up. And then as it cooks, it will get a little thicker and thicker. You know, as we added the water, that's going to be the tell for how it's going to turn out. So when we get done with this, if you look at it and think, gosh, this is a little more watery than I like, add less water when you're putting that stage in. If it's like, wow, this is really too thick, add a little more water the next time you cook it. And again, as we've said, repeat it many times, you can always add more, don't add too much.
Can you substitute that water for wine?
I think at some point you're going to get a little too winey of a sauce, if that's true. Now, again, if that's a flavor that you enjoy.
Add the water and the wine, because if you're adding more water to the mixture, I just want to know if you could maybe, instead of adding so much more water, maybe mix the two, maybe add a little bit more wine, a little bit of water.
You could.
If it's too thick.
Yeah, you could. The wine is more, the water is more in there to diffuse it more. The wine's more in there to flavor it. So
Okay.
I just tend to add it as a layer. You know, you're kind of, as you can see, you're kind of layering this a little bit,
Right.
which is often what we do in Italian cooking and French cooking. I would say same kind of thing. You're just trying, and it's time consuming. You know, that's the one thing about it. You know, a lot of times we could have chopped all this up, boom, thrown it all in that pan at one time. It's not going to come out bad, but it's not quite the same as when you layer everything in there together. So the thing I'm going to want to do, I'm going to pull this off the flame for now. And then we have over here what's called a heat diffuser.
Oh.
So essentially this is the poor man's version of a very expensive pot. You buy a very expensive pot, they tend to have a, you know, they can have a thick bottom on it, and it will, you know, spread and diffuse the heat throughout the bottom of the pot. This is a pretty good pot. When you're going to simmer something for a long period of time, these things are really, really useful to stop any burning from going on.
Okay,
So
perfect.
we're going to put that on our flame now.
Put that on your wish list as well.
There you go. And we're going to put our pot back on there. And now I'm going to let this start heating up. So I'm going to leave it on the temperature I have it on.
Which is medium-high heat.
Right? We're going to put the lid on it. Now here's the other little trick to this, is you're going to want to put a lid on it, but you're going to want to leave enough for steam to come out and for it to thicken up and to get rid of some of the water out of the gravy. So this is the old Italian style way, you know, the tilted lid on the top.
Okay, perfect.
And so we're going to let this heat up, and as it heats up, you're going to again start to see the bubbles come up to the top. You're going to see it really almost getting to a boil. Once we get it to that point, then you're going to want to turn this to low, pretty much.
Okay.
And then you will cook it, you know, essentially 2 or 3 hours.
Okay.
And then the next step we're going to do is to make the meatballs. Once we're done making the meatballs and they're done, we're going to put some of those meatballs in there, and that's going to even add another layer of flavor to it.
Wow. So this will be a really flavorful gravy.
There you go. So our next step is we're going to make the meatballs.
Okay.